Hello. In this module, we're going to discuss hackers and the psychology of hackers. So first, what is hacking? So hacking is a general term. It's generally used when somebody is gaining access into a digital system or accessing data, specifically without authorization or permission. And generally, when we use the term hacking or talk about hackers, it has a negative or nefarious association. And so that's something that we're also going to be discussing is this image and idea of what is hacking, what are hackers, and why it would fall into something in a forensics course and why hacking has become really the forefront of online criminal activity. So the first thing is to stop and think, where are we right now? What do we think of hackers when we think about hackers? And typically we have this image of dressed all in black in the hoodie in front of the computer, spying on this sort of evil Hollywood-esque type portrayal of it. And one of the things that's important to think about that is that when we talk about hacking from a forensic perspective, this is what we see, and this is what we think of, is this dark, shady way of approaching the world and trying to harm other people and having these nefarious actions and why. And as a cyber psychologist, and when you think about hackers, one of the things that is important to do is to look beyond this, to look beyond the stereotypes of the way that we think about hackers and the way that they may be portrayed in the media and the way that some of them have been villainized, and to look at them of what they actually look like. And so, here are three very well-known hackers. We've got Robert Morris, who created the Morris worm. Kevin Mitnick is kind of the original well-known hacker, and then Adrian Lamo, who became well-known hacking data information privacy. And the fact that these three people just look like regular people. You might walk past them in the street. They may look like somebody you went to high school with. And you might not automatically think, oh, all right, this is somebody that would do something nefarious, or this is somebody that is trying to actively harm other people. What is their motivation? That they're not necessarily that dark, shadowy figure that we think of when discussing hackers, or even if you Google hackers and then look at the images, you get that dark, shady character like we saw on the previous slide. So the most important thing that we can do when we're profiling or we're thinking about trying to understand the motivation of hackers is the first thing is to see them as people that you might know, people that you may have gone to school with, that you may have walked past, that may be in the street, that may be sitting at the Starbucks cafe. They're not necessarily the way that they may be portrayed as these very, very socially awkward or dark acting people. So the first step is, who are they actually? To look beyond the mask. And so one really great example of this is Anonymous. So Anonymous is a hacker group, and they wore the Guy Fawkes mask. And when it started, it really was started by these two people, Kurtaner and Greg Husch, and it just spread out and became effectively a very well-known way for people to protest, for people to create a movement. And this went online and offline. So there would be protests just filled with people wearing this Anonymous mask, or filled with, online, where websites would be hacked and it would be done by Anonymous. And the thing is, when we think about Anonymous, there's again that dark, shadowy wearing the mask. But when you take away the mask and you see, okay, here's Katana and here's Greg Husch, actually, again, they're people. Kurt is on Facebook, is on Twitter. His mom actually has a Twitter, right? And is a non-mom, or she's very proud of the fact that her son went and started Anonymous. I mean, these are people with families. They have children, they have wives, they have relationships. And when we're thinking about the motivation of that, or what happens, why would these movements start? We don't think of them as human. We think about Anonymous, when we think about their hacking activities and what's going on, you don't think of the face behind Anonymous having a mom on Twitter that's bragging about their actions. But that's what happens, right? They are human. And so we want to, especially in this class, when we talk about different activities and integrating forensic psychology with cyber psychology, it's not quite as simple as, say, when you profile a serial killer and there's patterns of behaviors. Are they sticking to a particular gender? Is there a type there of people that they're creating as victims? While some of that may also be the case, with hacking, it becomes a little bit different. We're going to talk about why. And some of it has to do with looking beyond the mask of when something is online and they're hurting other people. There's this, you've heard the online disinhibition effect, that when you're doing something on a computer, and this is just good to know for all of cyber psychology, as we talk, especially, we'll get into this when we talk about cyberbullying and why people can tend to be more aggressive online. But because when a hacker sits down in front of a computer, they may not see the people that they're hurting on the other end. Whereas, say, a serial killer may actually be looking into the eyes of their victim as they're hurting them. This is something that has a very, very different kind of a sociopathic outlook on life, to be able to look somebody directly in the eyes and cause them harm, as opposed to tapping some keys on a computer and writing a virus and not really seeing perhaps some of the actions or what's happened, the consequences as a result of the hacker's activity online. So when thinking about hackers, it is really important to look at them as people before looking at them as criminals or people that may want to cause harm. So starting with, why do hackers hack? And there's a lot of different reasons that span the reasons, the gamut of why somebody may decide to hack. Simple ones being financial motivations. If you're able to find an exploit, if you're a hacker, and so an exploit is when you're able to find vulnerability in code. Think of it almost, so to bear it down to a very non-technical way of doing something, it's almost like when you're editing someone's paper and you find typos, all right? When somebody is writing code or they're writing a program, there may be flaws. And what happens is that these hackers are able to go through and read the code or run programs on the code to find vulnerabilities. When they find a vulnerability, they can sell that, and they can sell it in a couple of different ways, depending on the hat that they wear. And so some of the financial motivations could be to sell it on the dark web, on the black market, whatever you want to call it. But there are places that will buy bugs and exploits. So you get somebody to write the exploit, they find the exploit, and then they sell it to the people that actually do some of the more nefarious activities. The other option B is that there's something called bug bounties, and major companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft, they have these bug bounty programs where if the hacker goes to them with an exploit and says, I found this vulnerability in your code, I want to announce my research at, say, a local security conference, or I want to share this, but I'm going to give you 6 months or so to patch the code. Or they just want to get the bounty for it, they can actually make upwards times 20, 30, $100,000 to be able to exploit the code, but present it to the company for a way to change that. Another motivation can be nation state sponsored or cyber warfare. And we'll talk about that when we talk about cyber terrorism a bit more. But also, this goes in and ties a little bit with the hacktivists. Now hacktivists, he said, is when there's a hacker that has more of a cause that they want to get behind. And so we saw some of this, especially with recent political turmoil that's happened, is you may have somebody that wants to hack the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And so that may be something like, a way that they want to hack into to take something down, to take down either a Republican or Democratic Party, or some some political leanings, or they're actually trying to harm another country. And so this, you hear talk about China hacking, or Russia or Korea or different countries hacking each other. And so it's again, when we talk about cyber psychology, it's taking humans and taking crimes and taking things that may or may not have already existed and putting it into an online forum, right? So somebody broke into Watergate, for example, during Nixon's presidency. So they broke into the Democratic headquarters. Well, sometimes nation state sponsored, is almost like the online version of Watergate, perhaps, or it can be country to country, or something like that. There may be political leanings behind it. Corporate espionage is another reason, something like the Sony hack, and it can be for reasons that maybe, again, there's a big company and the hacktivists may want to call them out for some action. They've done something that they believe to be unethical, or they want to log in and get access to expose a company and expose people that are participating in it. So for example, the Ashley Madison hack, which was a porn site that was hacked several years ago, and that was pulling out a lot of data about people that had visited this website and this corporation for their online porn. There could be something like resource theft. So this might be transferring funds, which, although that shows many times, again, in that Hollywood version of I'm going to transfer all this bank money into a personal account, that doesn't happen quite as often as some of the others. There's a joke people make and say, if hackers are doing all these wonderful things, why can't they go and hack in and cancel all student debt, right? So that kind of resource theft doesn't happen quite as often. And then the two that I listed, hacktivists, so those that have a statement that they want to make, that they want to lean into a particular cause. They want to call somebody out. They have a mission, and it's not to necessarily cause harm or even for their own personal gain. It's because their goal is to expose something, to call something out that they don't feel is correct. And so, for example, if you look into, say, like Julian Assange or Edward Snowden, they might fall more into the hacktivist category, that they wanted to hack because that they felt that information that is about the public should be made available to the public. And then the last reason is for fame and notoriety. And this is a big one that we want to discuss, because in the hacker industry, it can become very insulated, and they have what's almost, they call them rock stars, effectively, that you get somebody who becomes a name and it is known for the different hacking, the different hacks that they've had. They become very well known. I mean, Kevin Mitnick has become renowned as being the original hacker and this well-known hacker. And when somebody makes a name for themselves, or they find an exploit and then they go to a hacker conference and publish on it, and they become very well sought out, then it creates this very big sense of pride and fame. And so there are famous hackers out there. There's a famous hacker, his name was Barnaby Jack, and he found a way to hack into ATMs. And now Barnaby was not a Black Hat hacker in the traditional sense. So he actually gave a talk at Black Hat, and he hacked this ATM, and all of this money just started spitting out of it, right? And as a term, if you look up it, jackpotting from Barnaby Jack hacking. And this actually found its way onto a couple of crime TV shows, the notion of being able to hack this ATM, being able to hack self-driving cars. So Charlie Miller and these people, these hackers that made names for themselves because they found an exploit that they commercialized on and they were in the news for, and it gets brought up, and they become very famous for these hackers. And that is very appealing to a hacker community, especially within it when you're looking at these different hacker groups. So these are some of the motivations. So when you're looking at why has a hack occurred? What is going on? Why was Sony hacked? And this is when you do your case studies, the questions that you want to be asking. Why did this occur? Why did this happen? What was the motivation? Why did this cyber criminal or somebody who's on a cyber watch list commit this particular hack? What was the motivation behind it? So some of the research, though, that's actually out there, and there is newer research, and should be newer research, but so the kind of tried and true older research found that hackers, that they were motivated by the challenge, and this does still stand, right? That the challenge, the excitement to succeed, and the desire to learn is actually more of the appeal than the vengeance, sabotage, and fraud. That it's almost like it's a puzzle, it's a problem to be solved. And when you're giving a hacker this challenge, so you have somebody who is very, very smart, very talented with computers, And sometimes you will have, for example, a corporation that says we are not able to be hacked. And that is like just waving the flag in front of the bull. All right. And this has happened. There's been a couple of different companies. There's a password company that went on and said, my password will never get cracked. And so sure enough, several days later, it was. It's more often than not, unless you're getting into what we'll talk about when we talk about cyber terrorism, but your average hacker, if you go to a security conference or a hacker conference, what you're going to find there is, and you'll see this in one of the videos that I posted, is a lot of action and energy and fun. And it's one of the reasons why the movie Hackers has sort of stood up through the hacker community, and it's a little tongue in cheek now, so many years later, but it is almost captures more of the reality of the hacker mentality than this dark in the that hooded sweatshirt, vengeance, sabotage, and fraud mentality. So one of the questions when asking why would somebody hack, or what's the motivation behind it, or what are they trying to prove, it's because they have a reason for it. And what is that reason? Is that reason for fame? Is that reason just to see if they could? And then they were able to do it and then got tempted because there was money behind it, or they wanted to publish that exploit, or they wanted to see if there was a way that they could take down a political organization that they don't agree with, or a particular person. Somebody wants to take down Twitter. That is a feather in their cap that they were the person who got to take down Twitter. And that may not even mean something because they don't know who it is outside of the hacker community, but within the hacker community, to be able to say, I did that, can really come with putting yourself out there as I'm smart, I'm capable, and I'm sought after. And so there is that certain fame and rock star mentality of wanting to be accepted within the security industry. So I want to encourage you to look beyond what we might think is that it's malicious and it's always cyber warfare and against each other, but that there are other, I hesitate to be more innocent, but less nefarious reasons for why somebody might hack. So with that, the common types of hackers. So you've got your white hat hackers, which are ethical hackers, and those are the ones that are seeking to find vulnerabilities without any malicious intent. You may find that people that were once black hat hackers, which are the hackers that do have malicious intent, may then later in life become white hat hackers. So Kevin Mitnick is a really good example of this. He was doing some malicious hacking and to see if he could for the challenge, lots of different reasons. And then once he got out of jail, turned into became a white hat hacker to help organizations and people become more secure. And some of the way of doing that is to find these vulnerabilities. So you might have somebody who finds a vulnerability, say for Microsoft, goes to Microsoft and says, hey, I found this vulnerability. I want to help you repair it. You have a bug bounty for it. You pay me, and then I'll help you return it. So there are sometimes white hat hackers are hired to do this. They're hired to hack companies by the company. And so that way that they're able to find these vulnerabilities before black hat hackers can. Gray hat hackers, they may disclose they may not be working, say, for a particular organization, but they may not also have malicious intent. So they would say, find the exploit and then go and present it, never telling the company about it. And if you watch the different talks that get accepted at DEF CON or Black Hat or these different security conferences, a lot of the conference organizers have to then push back, and when somebody wants to release a vulnerability and say, have you talked to the company about it? So the gray hat hacker, again, is right in that. They're not black hat hackers that have malicious intent, but they're not white hat hackers that are going to help the company out. They're really just, I found this, I want to disclose this, and I have no meaning either way. I'm just more interested in the fact that I found the flaw and I'm going to disclose this vulnerability. And then hacktivists, so they may gain unauthorized access to a website or something else to bring awareness or to shine a light on a political or social issue. So usually when somebody's a hacktivist, they actually, in their mindset, and this can be up to interpretation in terms of the morality behind it, but they may have what they believe is a moral responsibility to call somebody out, to expose somebody. So when you think about Julian Assange, or you think about some of the hacking organizations that have been out there that have exposed information, or Edward Snowden, they really believe that this has to be, this information has to be shared because it's the right thing to do. That if you are, say, a politician, or you are somebody who works for the government, then it is important to expose this information. So hacktivists are working within a much stronger moral or ethical code, perhaps, than some of the other types of hackers. And then there's hacker groups. So hacker groups are really way to gain credibility. And so there are very elite hacker groups that are out there that many people can look up to, they strive to join. So one being Anonymous, which is very, very famous. And they fought, and they were hacktivists, they fought for social justice, they wanted to expose wrongdoers. Anonymous is believed to be the largest hacking collective in the world. So you recognize them by that Guy Fawkes mask members would wear. And because anybody and everybody could go and wear that mask, that was how they essentially became so popular, because it wasn't particularly elite in that regards of anybody could go and wear the mask, make the protest, or make the statement. And so because of that, it grew, and people were proud of being part of Anonymous because they felt that they were fighting for something. Chaos Computer Club, this is a German group. They try to stay within the law, though in their famous hack, they stole 134,000 Deutschmarks. They did later return that, but they did it to highlight their security flaws in the system. So again, they stole it, said, look, just wanted to prove we could, now we're going to return it. So because they can, because it's one of those examples of they worked together to do it, and did it as a group, became very well known. They have a conference that they hold every year, and it's there's a lot of appeal and desire to be part of that group. Cult of the Dead Cow. This is one that was in video this week. We saw them releasing one of their software at DEF CON conference. Again, it's like a rock concert, or it's like people coming out on stage to a great deal of fanfare. And so they actually were one of the original people that used the term hacktivism, and they released testing passwords to security and controlling computers from afar, and they've done a lot of different things. They helped contribute to the development of Tor. So if you're familiar with Tor, it's a very important privacy tool in the net that actually helps people remain anonymous, so as to not have their data or their messages shared. So Tor takes somebody's private information or private communications or activities and protects them from it. And so this can be very frustrating from the side of somebody who's trying to expose hackers, because privacy is a very, very fine line. What should be accessible, what shouldn't be accessible? Where is the line of privacy? And we could have a whole class just talking about the ethics and the morality of privacy. But a lot of times privacy is one of the hottest issues with security professionals and hacker groups, is what is the line between what should be public information and what should be private information. You see this happening a lot with Facebook in terms of what information should they be sharing, what data should they be sharing, do you own your own data? And we won't be watching it in this class, but I highly recommend that that you watch The Social Dilemma and The Greatest Hack, both which are on Netflix, because they are excellent examples of the way that data is used and the way that psychology of social media and hacking can really influence people. So definitely recommend those two movies to help you see a little bit into the hacker mindset of privacy and data privacy. And then anyway, another group is the Lazarus Group, the Guardians of Peace. They do a lot of corporate espionage and exposing. So they're a high-profile organizations in different countries. They possibly may be associated with North Korea. This one is a little fuzzy, but they've claimed for the Sony hack, Bangladesh Bank. So this is a particular group that has worked together to do a lot of corporate exposure. So these different hacker groups, and your book talks about the group hacker versus the lone hacker. Many of the big hacks that do take place within these hacker groups. Now, these hacker groups we'll talk about in a moment may reach out or may use some of these lone hackers to assist or to be the front person of a hack. But Many times these are coordinated efforts with people with different talents, because even the lone hacker, when they make a hack, usually end up telling somebody about it or sharing it, and they do look out for each other. Hackers do have a way of having each other's back in terms of privacy, and that's one of the advantages of within the hacker groups is everybody is looking out for others, and there's a whole system within these hacker groups, for not these ones particularly, because these are more of the you know, the white hat ones, the gray hat ones, but for the ones that we don't know about, these dark web black hat hackers, a lot of times it is multiple people working together. Now, one of what I find to be some of the scariest pieces, the juvenile hackers. So you have many times people who are under 18. Now, we know somebody who's under 18, they're going to be tried as a juvenile. So older and more experienced hackers actively try to recruit juvenile hackers, because if a juvenile hacker gets caught, they're not penalized as adults. So, and also, so teenagers are more reckless, they're more likely to take risks, they want to be accepted and recognized in the hacker community, they want that validation. Plus, there's a divide in generations. The teenagers of today are digital natives, meaning that they've grown up with computers. They're familiar with them in a way that older, almost retired IT person or tech person may not be. So it almost creates a perfect storm of, you have these what's called these old school hackers that now, back in late 1990s, 2000, when the internet was in its heyday and all of these hackers were coming out, and the hackers movement was big. And so these legendary hackers, going to have next the Cult of the Dead Cows, these legendary hackers, Lovecraft, I mean, all of these hacker groups. And these digital natives have grown up knowing of these hacker groups. And so what happens with some of the darker hackers or more nefarious hackers, because they are now older, they will be tried as an adult. So what they do is they mentor a younger hacker. And so it's a perfect storm of a teenager who wants to learn how to hack, wants to be in with the crowd, and somebody takes them under the wing, teaches them how to hack. And if the juvenile gets caught, they're just tied as a juvie and their record can be expunged. So the hack has been made, the person who's originally behind it isn't caught, and the poor teenager that is caught is just going to have their record likely expunged when they're 18, or it's not as, they don't have as much to lose as, say, somebody does, an experienced hacker who's in their 40s may. So want to be on the watch out for teenagers, juvenile hackers, because it really does become the perfect storm when you have an up and coming hacker who is paired with an experienced hacker, and maybe they've looked up to this hacker for their entire life as a digital native. And so to be taken under that person's wing and accepted by them, it's a big deal. And they're willing to show what they can do and learn from them, and get into a lot of trouble for them. So within this is the hacker ethic. And this is an older concept, but a lot of it does still hold. So some of the common values shared by within the security community. So the access of computers, that people should be given access to computers, that information should be free. There tends to be a mistrust of authority, especially in terms of politicians or corporations. Hackers should be judged by their ability, that part of the anonymity behind that of you don't know their age, you don't know their gender, that hackers should just be judged by their ability to hack. That art and beauty can be on a computer, that a computer can change one's life for the better. So that computers can be this positive thing, that they can be artistic, that hacking can be an art. And that information and the access to computers can educate people, can inform people of things, that there should not be ways. So if you want to look into other countries, when we look into, say, something like China, where information is controlled and monitored. So very much so that there's a lot of hackers that do not believe that they believe that computers and access to information and data can change one's life for the better. And then there's you don't litter on other people's data, and you make public data available, but protect private data. And so this is where things get to the fine line. And so the issue being that your data as an individual is your data that should be protected, that the government or your company should not have the ability to look through your private information, your private emails. So, and if you've looked at times when there's been companies such as Apple that have pushed back when, okay, so if we want to, if you're arrested, and should you be forced to unlock your phone? And so there's this organization called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or the EFF, and a whole organization that's designed to helping inform people about their rights to their privacy, because it is important to know. And so hackers will many times try to do what they can to protect private data and protect the individual. Well, if it's information that should be public, say, such as government information or something about a community, that should be information that is made available or exposed. So less likely to expose an individual's information, more likely to expose a public entity's information. And so I encourage you to look into those two movies in terms of The Greatest Hack and The Social Dilemma, because it does discuss a lot about some of the morality and the ethics around data, which is a huge source of contention within the security industry and the hacker community. Common types of attack. Don't worry too much about these. This is just so you recognize the terms. We're not going to get into anything too technical here, but to know what they mean. So there's what's called a denial of service, or a DDoS. And so this is just taking down or disruption of the service of offerings. So for example, if there was a DDoS or DOS attack on the electrical grid, a hacker could, this would be very hard to do, by the way, but it could be possible that they could hack into the electric company and take down the electricity for all of New York, for example, or all of DC. Now, if you took down all of the electricity for a country or for a city, that would cause a lot of damage and a lot of problems. It would render services ineffective. They were able to take down the internet or deny access to the internet. A lot of times what you do, or you do see it, is more like, so Twitter is down for a little while, or Facebook is down, or there's a particular website that has been taken down and that you're not able to access that. So think of that as denial of service. They've hacked into something to disrupt the service of the offerings. They've been hacked, so now you're no longer able to access that service. Another approach is infiltration. And so this can be done by what's called red teams or tiger teams. And so it's physically or virtually gaining access to the internal workings. So this can actually be done, you've probably seen in some kind of Hollywood movie where they use somebody else's ID and eye scan to be able to hack into the mainframe, or wherever it is that they're trying to get. They pretend to be somebody else, or they do sort of social exploitation, in a way to be able to access something or infiltrate. One of the things that's interesting with the infiltration is it many times can use employees of an organization with or without their knowledge. So there may be an email that's sent, and the unsuspecting employee opens up the email. We'll talk about this next week when we talk about malware and fraud and how that happens. But now they've opened up the email, they've run the program, and the hacker is now in and has infiltrated the company. So there's the actual physically gaining access to a company, but there's also then doing it digitally. But this is some way of infiltration, getting into an organization to access their internal workings, again, without authorization or permission. And then defacements, this is often done tactic of hacktivists. The content is modified. So you've seen where somebody has hacked into somebody's Twitter account and made all sorts of posts that's clearly not them. Or if you've ever gone to a website and the website content has been completely changed by a hacker. This is something Anonymous did a lot of hacktivists will do this as a call out. So those are the three common types of attacks. So DDoS can have a lot of trouble to it, because you are literally taking down the service or you're disrupting it. And depending on what it is that you're taking down, and when you're rendering a service ineffective, that can be very malicious, that can be very problematic. Infiltration also infiltration can even be step one to a DDoS attack. And then defacement, which tends to be a little bit more milder and is more just calling out. Think of it as almost like graffiti on a wall, but done digitally. So going to social engineering. So social engineering, and this is one of the videos that you'll be watching for this week, is one of the most subtle forms of hacking, and certainly often the least technical, but also the most effective. And the reason is because it relies on human weakness and our ability to want to trust or believe other people. And so it's often an essential component of infiltration. The hackers figured out what will work to gain someone's trust or to get them to open that email or give that piece of information. And then they're able to manipulate that people to gain the information or access. So when you watch the video this week on Jessica going through and gaining access to the reporter's phone, she knew that sounding like a very harassed and stressed out mom with a baby screaming in the background was going to gain sympathy. She sounds trustworthy. She sounded so frustrated. She had a believable story. And by socially engineering her way into that account, she was able to get that person locked out and for her to get all the control. And so why does it work? And the reason is because hacking a human is so much easier than hacking a business. Computers can be predictable in some ways. They don't always work and they can be hard to understand, but they do come down to zeros and ones and are binaries, and you can write programs to counteract programs, and you can try and find ways in which computers are predictable. Humans are always going to be unpredictable on some level. And we look to see what the human weakness is. Are they lazy? I mean, how many times have you watched a video on passwords and you know that you're supposed to have a good password, and yet you still use the password for the same websites, or use the same password? Your password does not have 20,000 digits and is changed every 2 weeks and everything. You know, we end up doing what's easiest for us. We want to trust people. We want to trust a poor harassed mother who sounds stressed out and has a crying baby. We want to help. We have sympathy for that. So hacking a human many times is so much easier makes it so much easier to infiltrate or get that information. And especially for malicious hackers that actually do want to gain that access with intent to lock somebody out of their account or to take down an organization. Many, many times, the first step to a severe hacking attempt starts with social engineering and starts with the human component, because they have to find some way in. There has to be some flaw or some weakness in the defense system. And fortunately, humans are usually that first layer of weakness. And so as we talk about and think about what does it take as a cyber psychologist, when you're thinking about how humans use the internet and how humans use computers and that interaction, this is when cyber psychologists can become of extreme and incredible value to security and to educating people about social engineering, and to understand why social engineering works, and to be able to help organizations anticipate where the human weakness is going to be and where it's going to come from. Even I've worked for a security company before, and we were all called to an all hands meeting, and it ended up being a ruse by the IT team, who during the time that everybody in the organization was at an all hands meeting, they went around and every computer that was open and not locked down, they flagged. And this is a security company. And how easy would it be for somebody to find a way just to get in? They're walking behind somebody who holds the door open for them. And then they're just walking around and are able to access computers that are left unlocked when someone goes to use the restroom or to get lunch or go to a meeting. And this was the point that they had made, because at least 30–40% of the people that were at this all hands meeting had left their computers unlocked. And again, that's a security organization that has been trained not to do that. So it happens all the time. So the phases of the social engineering attack. So first is, what is the target company? Where are you going to get this information? If you think about the sheer amount of trash that people throw away with information on it, how many of you use a shredder? Or how many of you throw away your bills with your information or your account numbers on them? Now imagine you're an organization doing that. So you find a victim. This can be a disgruntled employee or somebody that is a new employee and may not know all of the workings. You figure out, okay, this is the way in. You develop that relationship and then you exploit that relationship. So usually there's some sort of who's the target going to be, who's the victim, and at what angle am I going to be able to take once I have enough information about them, and how am I going to be able to exploit them. Again, the role of the cyber psychologist in all this is you're helping to understand the motivation of hackers. So if you're ever in the position to work with government or a company that's been hacked and you're looking to see what is the motivation, what has this organization done? Is there something that could cause a hacktivist to work against them? Is there some sort of conflict? You also want to be able to understand the dynamics between hackers and hacker groups. What are different hacker groups out there? Is there a lone hacker? Are they associated though with the hacker group, which may not be the hacker groups you see at a security conference, but maybe, and we'll talk about this when we talk about cyber terrorism, part of a group of people that are part of a nation state or part of an organization trying to take down another country. What is the relationship between that hacker and the group that they're associated with? Why are they trying to do this? Who do they represent? Look at the motivation behind a specific attack and look for patterns. So if there's a lot of attacks, for example, that have taken place against a political organization, is that the common thread? We're always looking for patterns. If social engineering was used, how and why? How are humans being exploited? Is there somebody like Jessica who's gone around and it's somebody who's pretending to be a mother with a screaming baby? You know, what is happening there? What are the weaknesses? What are the human weaknesses that are being exploited? And then to look beyond the stereotype to understand the person behind the computer. And so going back to when you think about Anonymous and everything that is Anonymous has done, do you think of the person, one of the people who started Anonymous being somebody with a mom that brags about them on social media, or being somebody that you may have gone to high school with, or may see at that Starbucks cafe, or you can look at the social engineering video and you see Jessica, who's so friendly and warm, but could absolutely hack the pants off you in that regard and lock you out of your account because she knows what she's doing. So we want to look past that stereotype to understand the person behind the computer. And this is a slide that I'm going to include to discuss at the end of every lecture, because we never want to forget the psychological response to being hacked by people. So yes, we're looking at who the perpetrators are, who the hackers are, what their motivations are, but let's not forget the psychological response to being hacked. Depression, anxiety, stress, the loss of reputation, the pride, the feeling of severe privacy. It can even lead to suicide. When that Ashley Madison hack happened, and there were people who were politicians, who were leaders in religious communities, who were exposed as being part of a porn site, and it was a huge loss of reputation, a huge loss of what they stood for within their communities. And there were several people that did commit suicide as a result of that hack. There are long-ranging implications to being hacked, and when we talk about this different crimes, when we talk about cybercrime, while we're talking about the perpetrators, we always want to remember the victims too, and what's happening, especially as psychologists and cyber psychologists, of who's at the other end of that computer. Because again, with the online distribution effect, and when we're not looking at sometimes the person, we're looking at the act, and we're looking at the disconnect between the perpetrator and the victim. So again, this isn't like a serial killer, or even somebody who goes into a bank and holds somebody up at a convenience store and looks them in the face before hurting them. They may never see their victim. Probably the person who did that Ashley Madison hack never even thought about the people on the other side that may have committed suicide, or that may have been hurt, or they may have and they may not have cared, because for them, why are you hiding? If why are you preaching one thing, that sex is wrong and that porn is terrible, but then you're also a member of a porn site? That may have been something that they did want to exploit. Those are always the questions that we want to look at, is what is the motivation? Why would somebody call that out? What did they find that made them want to exploit that particular hack? And then what is happening on the other side for the victims of that? Because sometimes the response to the victims, it may lead to the motivation of the hacker. So again, we will revisit this, the victims, the end of every lecture, because I think that's one thread that always goes through is what is the response to any kind of attack, whether it's cyberbullying, cyber terrorism, identity theft, all of these different things that we'll talk about throughout this class. What is the response to being a victim of these attacks? So if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to discuss. As always, otherwise, until next time, thank you.